When Nintendo announced that Kirby Airride would be getting a sequel for the Switch 2, I was astonished. A follow-up to one of Nintendo's original racing games that released over 20 years ago? That's awesome! But it also made me think. Nintendo used to have a bunch of amazing original racing titles, but nowadays the only thing we're getting is Mario Kart. So what the hell happened to all of these, and why did Nintendo stop making them? To find that out, I wanted to look back at some of the major racing games that haven't gotten much love from Nintendo in recent years, pin down why that is, and how, like Kirby Airriders, they might be able to return somewhere in the future. Starting with the one that everyone's dying to see. Imagine being an F-Zero fan and seeing that this got a sequel first. F-Zero is one of Nintendo's most iconic racing franchises, with its futuristic setting and incredible high-speed gameplay. It started out as a showcase for the new graphical capabilities of the Super Nintendo, but really started to get its high-speed feeling with F-Zero X on the Nintendo 64. Its smooth 60 FPS gameplay, 3D environments, and bizarre track design were revolutionary when it came out, and made F-Zero X stand out as one of the most unique racing titles of its era. A couple Game Boy Advance games akin to the original game on the SNES followed, but the franchise's peak was F-Zero GX, released in 2003 for the GameCube. This is everything you could want from a game like this. It's fast, it's bold, it looks amazing, it has a story mode, and damn it, I wish I owned it. But after creating arguably one of the best racing games of all time, Nintendo just let it die. In 2023, we did see the release of F-Zero 99, but that was just a 99-player version of the original game on the SNES. A true sequel to GX never came out. But it's not like Nintendo completely forgot about it. I mean, we've seen cameos in Super Smash Bros., Nintendo Land, and even in Mario Kart. Nintendo clearly acknowledges F-Zero as one of their most beloved racing franchises. So then why did they stop making games? Well, here's the thing. F-Zero GX was just too good. For each of the main installments in the franchise, Nintendo implemented some new features that made them stand out from the previous entries. But after GX, they just didn't know where to take the franchise next. Combining that with the incredible success of the Mario Kart franchise and F-Zero's relatively modest sales numbers, and there just wasn't enough of a reason for Nintendo to make a new game. There were talks with Burnout developer Criterion in 2011 about a possible revival, but they already had their hands full with other projects, so unfortunately, it never came to fruition. But there may be hope, because F-Zero GX is now playable as one of the first games on the GameCube catalog on Nintendo Switch 2 Online, which probably means the franchise will suddenly get a lot more attention. So what better time for a revival than right now? I would love to see a new fully fledged F-Zero game, and honestly, I don't care if it's compatible to F-Zero GX. That game was already amazing, so building on that, but adding modern graphics, some new tracks, and a different story would be more than enough for me to pick it up. Of course, if they were to revive the franchise, I wouldn't mind the biggest F-Zero game the world has ever seen, but let's be real, anything is better than nothing at this point. A very different franchise that disappeared around the same time as F-Zero is Wave Race, a series all about jet ski racing. While obviously not as fast as F-Zero, this franchise stood out through its very realistic water physics. Apparently it started out as a top-down racer on the Game Boy, but on the N64 it gained massive appeal by having some of the most unique handling of any racing game out at the time. Wave Race was on top of the world at this point, but the physics went even further on the GameCube. Wave Race Blue Storm was probably one of the best games the GameCube could have launched with, because it was an incredible showcase of what the console brought to the table. Like, holy shit, this looks more like water than real water! Doesn't taste as good though.
What the f*** was I thinking?
The water physics got even more realistic, there were different weather options, and every lap felt different from the other because of the always changing wave patterns. It was a technical masterpiece. But this franchise didn't die for no reason. Even though Blue Storm was technically incredible, it meant the racing got a bit too realistic. This meant a lot of players, especially those who played on the N64, were disappointed because it didn't feel like an arcade racing game anymore, but rather like a jet ski simulator. And I experienced this in my time with both games as well. Blue Storm is way less forgiving in its handling. For example, if you use a boost on a straight where there's just a couple of minor waves, it's very easy to lose control over the vehicle, whilst in Wave Race 64 I never had such problems. The step up in difficulty is a little extreme. This doesn't take away from the fact that Blue Storm is a good racing game, but sales did drop by a huge margin with this installment, making it less attractive for a possible sequel. Also, because the physics in Blue Storm were already so impressive, it would be very difficult to come up with a new idea for the next game, and going back to the more arcadey feel of 64 would probably disappoint fans of Blue Storm. So by making the game too realistic, and basically creating two separate audiences, Nintendo kinda shot themselves in the foot. Regardless, Wave Race was a great racing franchise that, with the right changes, could probably work very well today. So I'd love to see them come back in some sort of a remake collection where all the tracks from both games got piled together under one physics system that finds a balance between the arcade feel of 64 and the more realistic feel of Blue Storm. And maybe the top-down Game Boy tracks could even be remade for some kind of bonus mode. I don't think this is very likely to happen, but jet ski racing is a genre that hasn't been touched upon much in recent years, so who knows? Maybe Nintendo will surprise us. The sea isn't the only place where Nintendo used to push the limits of physics though, because they also did so in the dirt. The Excite series was Nintendo's fast-paced dirt racing franchise, but to even call it a franchise is a little strange, because it doesn't necessarily feel like one. The series started out on the NES with Excite Bike, a game all about racing dirt bikes and completing a race in the fastest possible time. Honestly, if you thought this was the only game in this franchise, I wouldn't blame you, because this is by far the most recognizable one. However, on the N64, it evolved into a 3D physics-based racing game cleverly named Excite Bike 64. This felt like quite a sensible follow-up to the original game, but then Nintendo was like, F it. Trucks. Excite Truck for Wii is honestly an incredible arcade racer with unique features like morphing terrains, but what I don't get is why they plastered the Excite logo on it. Excite didn't really have a strong identity to begin with, but at least the first games felt like they followed up on each other. Excite Truck, however, feels nothing like its predecessors. I have a feeling Nintendo thought of this crazy cool racing game idea and then just slapped the Excite logo on for marketing purposes. That could save any game! But this seems to have had the opposite effect, because it caused the franchise to lack any form of concrete identity. They did try to stick with the feeling of Excite Truck for the next game called Excite Bots, but at this point Nintendo probably realized the Excite franchise was a sinking ship because it only released in North America. Other than a modern interpretation of the original game on the Wii's online shop, the franchise has laid completely dormant in recent years. I couldn't find confirmed reasons for why this franchise died, but my guess is that a combination of not knowing what the hell to do with it since it didn't have a concrete identity and poor sales numbers compared to that f***ing plumber is what caused Excite to suddenly vanish. I think if Nintendo released Excite Truck and Excite Bots under a different name, it would have had much more of an impact, and Excite Bike could have just been a franchise on its own. That would have been way easier to market, and if they'd gone for that approach, maybe we would have had a modern Excite Bike today. On that note, I'd like to see this franchise return in two different ways. The WiiWare game was a great modern approach to Excite Bike, so if that could just be remastered with a bit more substance and put out on Switch for like $20 or less, that would be a great way to resurrect the franchise and make it accessible for Nintendo fans who never played it. As for the other games, I would love a remastered compilation of Excite Truck and Excite Bots. Both games are really good and don't need much of an improvement, and this would be a great way to introduce Excite Bots to a European audience as well. As for Excite Bike 64, let's just leave that one where it is. Diddy Kong Racing is one of Nintendo's all-time classic racing games that took the kart racing genre to new heights. You thought Mario Kart 64 was good when it came out? Well, this f***ing destroyed that. Don't get me wrong, Mario Kart 64 is a really fun game, but Diddy Kong Racing had so much more going for it. It had 3D character models, 3 different types of vehicles, a bigger character roster, an open hub world, a story mode, and even boss fights. This game was everything a kart racer should be. So why the hell was this a one-time thing? Well, it all has to do with Rare. No, not the steak, that Rare. Rare was a developer working closely with Nintendo in the 90s. They developed a ton of games for the SNES and N64. Top titles being GoldenEye 007, Banjo-Kazooie, Conker's Bad Fur Day, and most importantly, everything Donkey Kong related, including Diddy Kong Racing. In 2002, however, Rare was bought by Microsoft, meaning that the entire team behind the game was gone. Banjo and Conker appeared in Diddy Kong Racing 2, but those characters were now owned by Microsoft, which resulted in licensing problems. This made the development of a new DKR game insanely difficult, and the only other entry in the franchise was a remaster for the DS with Conker and Banjo removed. Because of this, I honestly don't see the game being rebooted again, even though it was very successful in the past. Mario Kart has also adapted many of the features that once made this game unique, like driving on water, flying, and an open world, so I'm afraid this will forever be a relic of the past. I was convinced this was playable on the N64 online library on Switch though, but apparently that wasn't the case. So I'm very much hoping Nintendo will at least bring it back there, because I just really want to give it a try, and I'm guessing a lot of other people would too. These were probably the 4 biggest titles that haven't been touched on in recent years, but I also found 2 smaller titles that were just too interesting to not address in this video. The first of which being Mach Rider, a motorcycle racing game for the NES that combined high-speed action with vehicle combat.
You are the Mach Rider.
What the fuck?
It has quite a post-apocalyptic setting, which heavily contrasts with most of Nintendo's other titles. This game hasn't seen any new installments since then, cause it didn't sell very well and obviously doesn't fit with Nintendo's brand, but it hasn't been completely forgotten since there have been some references to it here and there, like the Mach Bike in Mario Kart Wii. I think it could actually work very well today if it was modernized and the story mode was added, because this game hasn't aged that well. I might also just suck at it, but that's beside the point. And the final game I want to talk about today is Stunt Race FX. This was a 3D racing game on the Super Nintendo. At the time, this was incredible, considering 3D gaming was everything but mainstream. And it really had an identity of its own, because the vehicles are all alive and the art style looks really fun and cartoony. It definitely had the potential to turn into a franchise. But this game's sole purpose was to showcase the graphical capabilities of the SNES's new FX chip that allowed for 3D graphics, which becomes very apparent from the game's name. I don't think this will ever return because it was just a tech demo, but if it were to happen, that would be absolutely hilarious. So, what actually happened to all of Nintendo's original racing games? Well, after diving into all of these, a pattern starts to form. It's not that Nintendo can't make great racing games, it's that every single one of these franchises hit a point where Nintendo just didn't know what to do with them anymore. At the same time, Mario Kart has exploded over the past few decades. It became bigger, safer, and more profitable than any of the other racers I talked about today. And once Mario Kart started selling tens of millions of copies per release, Nintendo really didn't need any other racing games. Like, why would they invest tons of money into one of these franchises if Mario Kart would always be a guaranteed success? But that's exactly why a new Kirby Airride is so exciting, because it proves Nintendo can revive a long-dead racing IP if they believe the time is right. And like I said, I think there's definitely viable ways for Nintendo to bring these franchises back. So be sure to let me know which of these racing games you would like to see return first in the comments, and when you're down there, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. And if you enjoyed listening to me talk about experimental franchises on Nintendo platforms, then you're going to love this next video in which I analyze one of the most absurd games on the Wii that surprisingly fits the console very well.